Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Startup Talk on Titan Radio. We're broadcasting at Cal State Fullerton in Fullerton, California. And our show is all about startups and entrepreneurship. In the weeks to come, we're going to meet startups. We're going to talk to startup advisors, investors, and kind of decipher what goes on in a startup. This is a live broadcast, which we also record, and I encourage the audience to call in and ask questions. I'm your host, John Bradley Jackson. I get called JJ a lot. You know, I get asked, well, why do you get called JJ? Well, it turns out that most people named John Jackson have bad credit, and so I find out that when I apply for a loan, like a mortgage or something like that. So I'm a full-time professor at Cal State Fullerton, and I'm director of the Center for Entrepreneurship, and I oversee two of our startup incubators. I'm an angel investor, and I manage Titan Angels, a seed investment fund, which I started up a couple years ago. And my background is Silicon Valley, and I did a tour of Wall Street as well, helping companies go public, and that's where I learned about greed with a capital G. You can follow me on johnbradleyjackson.com and John Bradley Jackson on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and a few other places. Titan Radio is actually around for about 20 plus years, and it broadcasts 24/7 into 130 different countries. So occasionally I catch myself slowing down and starting to define things because I think, wow, somebody in Zimbabwe is listening to me and may not understand where Fullerton is. So if I sometimes overly define things, that's where it's at. Our guest today is marketing consultant Ryan Fratzke of Fratzke Media, which is a digital marketing consultancy. They are reputed to have a laser-like focus on their clients, trying to create a return on investment for the marketing dollars spent. And it's my pleasure to welcome Ryan.
Hello. Thank you for having me, JJ. I appreciate it. How you doing today?
Yeah, life is a Cabernet. Thank you. So tell me about Fratzke Media in, just a minute or two. What is it?
Sure. Well, Fratzke Media is a digital marketing consultancy, which is a little bit different than an agency. A lot of folks might have experience with agencies, but what makes us uniquely different is that rather than sort of giving you a fish, we want to teach you how to fish, right? So at Fratzke Media, we really believe in partnerships and helping our mid-size market clients all the way through the strategic process and the execution of their marketing strategies so that they can really build out that marketing muscle internally and become a digital leader.
So focusing on your company a little more, why are you doing this? What triggered this? Yeah,
that's a good question. It kind of goes back to our origins. I co-founded this business with my twin brother, James Fratzke. And we both actually built out our marketing career over the last decade, sort of lock and step. So we both started at the Walt Disney Company, where we were doing a lot of traditional media, broadcast and radio, television spots and things along those lines, and decided that, hey, we really need to start getting into digital. And so we went over to a digital marketing technology company by the name of Brandify. And there we really consulted and helped out your Fortune 50, Fortune 500 brands like Walmart and Disney again and Whole Foods, and realized that there's a ton of bureaucracy and things sort of move slowly, and they're investing very heavily in digital, but those medium-sized and small businesses, the ones that my father started, small businesses with 6 locations, or my grandmother started before him here in Fullerton, those sort of businesses were getting left behind. And so we started the consultancy to bring some of those leading strategies that the big players are doing and sort of eating everybody's lunch to the mid-market to help them really go through that digital transformation and make digital their competitive edge and actually give them a fighting chance in this sort of digital-first world.
So today, Fratzke Media is located in Fullerton.
That's
correct?
right. Hmm.
And the companies that you're serving, are they local? Are they global?
Yeah, good question. So for us, we are definitely we joke around and we say we're an international company because we actually have a customer or two in Toronto, but really it's a national company. So we have folks that we work with that are in Daytona Beach, Florida, that are in Virginia, that are here in California. So that's the thing that always sort of blows people's minds if they don't have experience in the digital world, that you're able to actually acquire customers without ever meeting them in person. And you're able to really showcase your value through the digital platform that you build.
Yeah, I think that's actually the opportunity, in fact, for startups is, the old model of bricks and mortar, face-to-face, is now trumped by this conversation that happens electronically, and that can be anywhere in the world where you're at least where you're relevant. Let's explore startup marketing just a bit. So you're a early stage company, and you want to ultimately go to market. But at the early stages, you're trying to figure out who you are and what you're doing. How does one start?
Yeah. Well, the thing about startups that I think is really important to actually embrace, a lot of times people say, hey, we're a small company. But I think that's a really important thing, right? Because in those larger companies, the bigger you get, the more bureaucracy that sort of starts to come about. You've heard the saying before, too many cooks in the kitchen. So luckily at the startup phase, depending on how many co-founders you have or how many folks you have on your team, you at least have the control of the direction that you decide to go in. And so the most important thing that you can really do is before you document your strategy, which is critical, you need to have a documented digital strategy, but you really have to take a step back and understand what is the story that you're trying to tell. Because if you don't have that story, then it doesn't matter which channels you leverage, you're not going to be communicating as clearly as possible. And so that just really comes down to knowing your customer, documenting that persona. What are the sort of things that they like to do? What are the potential roadblocks of communicating with them digitally? And then just being aware of that journey that they take online, because as much as you'd like to think that your idea is, the first time it's ever happened, unfortunately for you, there's a lot of noise out there and there's a lot of different competitors that may already exist, right? So you have to be able to differentiate yourself and understand that story and help yourself get found by really documenting that customer persona first.
Got it. And the term customer persona is used quite a bit. How would you define that?
Yeah, the way that I look at it is what are their sort of demographics? So who are they? Where are they from? When we worked with Walmart a lot, whenever they, and this is before starting Fratzke Media 3 years ago, but Walmart would always refer to the customer as she, right? And when they would start to then unpack what that meant, who was she? Well, she's college-educated millennial woman with, starting a family, right? So these are sort of things that you can start to unpack when you're thinking about what is our customer persona. And then you can start to do research and think about, okay, well, where do they live digitally? What platforms are they on? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it LinkedIn, et cetera, right? So that persona really helps you unlock your strategy in a lot of ways because it lets you know where are your people hanging out.
I think that's well said. And one of the first errors that startups make, based on my experience as a startup advisor and at the incubator, is that there's a presumption that just about everybody is going to be their customer.
Yeah.
Right. And it's probably about as far from the truth as you can get.
Yeah, I think startups, they sort of, sometimes it's, if we build it, they will come sort of mentality, right? And then they're not thinking about, well, how do we get the word out? And so it turns into more of a, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it really fall sort of situation. So you have to protect yourself by understanding that customer first.
Does your company ever get involved in helping the startup name its business or rename its business?
From time to time, as a consultancy, really what we try to do is bridge the gap between where our customers are and where they want to be, right? And so sometimes there's different situations that we don't necessarily put on our website, but we go ahead and we get involved because our team, we look at ourselves as solution engineers, and we're very good critical thinkers. So there's a few different situations where we have taken a step back with our customer and said, is this logo really conveying the story that you want to tell? Or is this name conveying the sort of story that you want to tell? And I think that the biggest pitfall sometimes that sort of gets in the way of good branding or good naming is sort of the emotional connection that folks have to their initial name. And I know from speaking from personal experience, I've come up with a lot of different ideas, and I'm like, oh, that would be a great name, and then you look it up, and somebody already has it. So now you get in the business of, oh, well, can I get a different URL? Can I get Fratzke.co instead of Fratzke.com, right? And so you start to sort of the water tends to get muddy when you have that emotional investment. So I think in those early phases, you sort of have to not be married to the branding right away. You have to do the research. You have to see what's available, and then it's not necessarily a bad idea to go out and do some testing, just an impromptu focus group of the sort of folks that you think are your customers or your ideal customer, going back to that persona, and do some testing and see what resonates with them better.
Yeah, it's interesting on the naming of a startup or a company or the renaming. Many founders think, well, if I file my DBA, doing business as, and I can find a URL, I'm good to go. And that is just a baby step in the research that you have to go through for making sure that you're going to be able to use that name.
Right.
So one is a regional search, and you start by state, and you can look at the legal entities that are registered with the state,
right,
of which we have a lot in California. But I don't know whether you know this, there are 50 states out there.
I've heard tell of that.
and it's very common to discover that you got the URL, you checked with the state about the name of your company, only to discover that someone in Missouri is already using that name, and they've been using it the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And unless they're willing to just say, okay, you can use it now, you got yourself a problem.
Right.
And so it's a national search. It's talking with the Patent and Trademark Office. And but then you still have the issue, does it connect with your audience?
Right. Well, I think if I can just piggyback off of that a little bit, names are very, very important. At Fratzke Media, we weren't very creative. We just put our name on it because we're a family-owned business, and it follows kind of a long tradition of American family-owned businesses like, Disney or Ford Motor Company, or even Walmart started as Walton Five and Dime for Sam Walton, right? So we weren't that creative. But when you come down to it, it's interesting you mentioned this idea of like changing the name halfway through. And when you're talking about like consistency of story, and you go and you watch, let's say just for example, you go and you watch a movie. Can you imagine halfway through if the movie changed its name, how confusing that might be, or if the plot just completely flipped out of nowhere? So, I see a lot of different folks changing their names, but you got to think about the equity that you've previously built and the opportunity cost of switching it. So do you run the risk of confusing your current fan base or your current customer base? Now, if that risk, if the reward outweighs that risk of, hey, we think this is going to be more viable in the long term, then you got to try and take that shot. But sometimes I think folks want to change the name just because, and that might not be the best strategy. So you have to test.
The testing, I would agree, is critical, and you should do that early on rather than later.
Sure.
And the rebranding and the renaming often is triggered because the original name basically sucked. Or they found out that there are limitations on its usage.
Yeah.
So there is prior art, there's someone else who's done it. You mentioned logo. What are your thoughts on logo design, the right way to do it, the wrong way to do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, I mean, I think I'm paraphrasing this quote from Da Vinci, but simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication, right? And so when you look at some of the brands out there today that are they're legacy brands, but they're moving more and more towards the simple. So a logo like Starbucks before there was a lot going on in the Starbucks logo with the siren, and it really explained it. And then now today it's just down to that simple sort of outline of the siren face with the basic green. It's moving more and more towards simplicity, and I think that's what the human eye likes to see. So I always try to sort of force people to think about what is the sort of the simplest way that we can try and convey this point, because then it comes back again to sort of the branding and the usage of the logo and getting people connected to it, right? So that's my main take. I try to keep it simple. I see some logos out today that almost look like they were created in the 80s, right? They kind of have a retro look to them. They have a lot of different elements, and I think that's okay if you want to stand out, but it's always helpful just to do kind of a quick Google search and look at what are the design trends in 2019 or going into 2020, because one thing that you want to make sure you do is if you're looking to look sort of cutting edge as a startup, is that you want to sort of be somewhat in line, but have something slightly different than what you're seeing out there today. So I know that advice is kind of contrary, like you want to be different, but you want to sort of fit in, but you've got to find that right fit.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%, because there are some industries, to be considered a player, part of that industry, you have to have color and design elements that say you're, and I'll give you an example. And that would be if you're in a ecological industry, if you're in landscaping. Well,
right.
Well, think about that. You're going to have the color of dirt, the color of trees.
It's going to be a lot of green.
Right. And so those are like traditions. But if you're going to be different, then you might very well rebel against that with some consequences.
Right.
Because people say, well, I don't see any green or dirt color, so what are you?
Yeah. Well, look at our brand. One of the things that you see a lot of is white, black, and purple. Well, why do we do that, right? Well, white and black is very clean, very sophisticated. Sort of, it sort of shows off sort of like prestige. So you can think of like your tuxedo is typically white and black. And then when you look at purple, purple is sort of a color also of royalty and prestige and high level of execution, right? So when you're thinking about a consultancy and the sort of things that you would want to see in that consultancy, it's professionalism, it's a high level of execution and things like that. So you definitely want to keep those things in mind to sort of psychologically you're going to connect with your potential consumer or your prospective consumer before they even realize that you're connecting with them, right? And you don't want to send off red flags, so to speak. So when I think about your example of landscaping, I try to stay away from like colors that might make you think of like dead plants, like black, a really, really dark brown. Red makes me think of fire, right? Like I want to keep those ideas away from my head when I'm thinking about landscape. So you definitely want to keep those things in mind.
Yeah, I got it. So one of the first steps in the visual side of digital messaging is the logo and its simplicity, and it's a basic color scheme that's going to be compatible with the vision of the company. And I've heard it said that logo is the design is the first step, then in the website. Would you agree with that?
I mean, yeah, in a lot of ways, you want to have an idea of what your story is, what your company is, and what you're trying to put across. So logo is very important. But if we unpack that just a little bit more and we think about the digital ecosystem, because at Fratzke Media, we're always thinking about the ecosystem, right? So the ecosystem consists of consumers, it consists of companies for you, it consists of competitors, right? There's over 7,000 different platforms out there today that companies and consumers can use to either interact with digital marketing or to sort of push out digital marketing. And a lot of those different systems, Google being the biggest example, runs purely on algorithm. And it's sort of helping you, or Google is looking at, what are the kind of questions that consumers have and what are the kind of answers that companies provide, right? So if you're sitting there as a startup and you're thinking about building out your digital presence, logo is critically important in terms of building out your brand awareness. You want to be able to have something that people can resonate with. But if you're just getting started, you want to be found. You want to get your story out there. You want people to know you exist. And the best way to do that, on top of actually having the website, is making sure that it's optimized properly, that it's answering questions for consumers better than your competitors can.
Got it. So let's explore the go-to-market side. And there are a lot of digital tools out there. Some work really well. Some are expensive. Some are maybe in decline. And so I've just got a list in front of me. So email marketing, tried and true. Lots of tools to enhance. What's your view on the future or the now of email marketing as a tool?
Yeah. Well, email, I think, is alive and well. A lot of folks say that email is dying or is dead, right? And I don't buy into that, because what you have in terms of an email list, even if it's an email list of 10 people, I'd rather have an email list with 10 folks who are engaged, who opted in, who said, yes, send me your information, send me your story, than a Facebook page with 10,000 likes, right? Because at the end of the day, the person has opted in, and as long as you're not spamming them, as long as you're keeping true to the promise of what you said you were going to give them when they subscribed, then they're going to be more inclined to look at that information. Opposed to look at your Facebooks of the world. Facebook started, and what they said was, they said, hey, brands, come on over here. We have this new platform, and you can build out your presence for free, right? And they implied you own this presence. And so brands invested heavily in Facebook and building out that audience and getting to 100,000 followers and things like that. And then as time went on, Facebook changed its monetization strategy, and it said, hey, you know what? You don't actually own this audience. We'll rent it to you through advertising, right? So engagement went down and down and down. So Facebook and different platforms like that, you're not going to have as much control over. But when it comes to email, assuming you're following those best practices, you have a group of people who have opted in. Mm-hmm. Now, what I hear a lot of times with startups, and I won't name any names, but the building, the complex where our headquarters is, there's a few different other startups in that space. And we had some just early conversations with them, and they were talking about email and how they got a list. They bought a list. Uh-oh. You know, they went and bought one. And we said, well, how's that going for you? Well, we're getting a lot of unsubscribes. The system is blocking us. And so people don't realize, you know, yes, MailChimp is your friend. HubSpot is your friend. Pardot from Salesforce is your friend. All those digital tools that help you automate email are super useful. But they also want to play by the rules. And what you don't realize is that those tools, like MailChimp as an example, it's sending your email campaigns from the same server that it's sending other email campaigns. And so they're actually collecting data, but also platforms like Gmail are collecting data as well. So Google knows, Gmail knows, if across the board people are marking your email as spam. And then it basically will send that information back to your MailChimps of the world and say, hey, this is a bad list. And you can actually get blocked out of MailChimp or HubSpot or any of those tools if you're spamming. So the number one thing you can do is build that email list organically. Mm-hmm. Don't go buy it. That's cheating. And the system and the digital system is optimized against cheating it, right? So they will penalize you.
Yeah, you brought up Facebook. And so certainly social media marketing has been the rage for a solid 10 years.
Yeah.
And we have the emergence of tools that are almost like utilities in Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, to name a few. In terms of balancing your budget and your time, how do you feel about social media marketing and its value?
It all comes down to your goals, your objectives, your strategies, and your tactics, right? And then understanding, and we call that the ghost model, and then understanding how your consumers will interact with the sort of strategies that you're putting into place to achieve your goal. So for us, we look at your website essentially as the hub, right? And so it depends on what outcome you're trying to drive. Are you trying to drive people filling out lead forms? Are you trying to drive people making a direct purchase through e-commerce? And then you use your other channels like social in support of that, right? So we have a client who, one of the things that we noticed was there was a real opportunity to build out an organic gathering of folks, a group within the Facebook, look at me, Facebook, where people could interact and see their wheels, their wheel manufacturer. And so there's a big culture around those Hellcat wheels or Camaro wheels and things like that, where people want to geek out on it first before they're sold, right? And so we help them actually build out that group and help them build out really organic content that didn't sell first. It didn't even soft sell. It just built out community. And now what we actually see through analytics is that we're driving traffic, organic traffic and clicks, or it's not necessarily considered organic. It's referral traffic. But we're now starting to see referral traffic to the site that then goes into a purchase funnel. So that's really exciting, is thinking about what is the goal. If we're trying to drive more sales, then getting more traffic to the site is an important piece of that. And if we can build out an organic community through Facebook, then we can drive that traffic. So it's just thinking about it, how you want to set it up, and then actually having a way to determine where we're successful. So setting up the objectives and making them measurable and timely. How much do we want to grow the audience? How many link clicks over to the website do we want? Is it important that this drives a conversion? Yes. So just measuring that. And if it's not working, there's a certain thing to be said for sort of being persistent and keeping with it, right? You don't want to quit right away. You need to keep testing out different things. But if it's not working over 6, 9, 12 months, then maybe that's not the right place for your brand to be building a group or an audience. And you need to be able to think about where else should we allocate this time, money, and effort.
Yeah, speaking of a tool that's measurable, what comes to mind for me is pay-per-click or Google AdWords.
Yeah. So
it's paid search, and you drop in your quarter or your mini quarters, and bing, you get instantaneous results. What's your posture on the effectiveness of AdWords?
PPC, AdWords, Google obviously being the biggest platform, but Amazon's getting into digital ads in a very big way. LinkedIn, which is part of Microsoft, and Bing, all getting into this in a very meaningful way. I think that PPC is an important piece of the puzzle, but it can't be the only piece of the puzzle. You really need to take a holistic approach. That's our stance on it. And so what I mean by that is that it's really good to do PPC right, but it has to be combined with that 1-2 punch of organic channels as well. Because your cost per click on, organic optimization like SEO is going to be much lower. Actually getting found organically, if you've positioned your site in such a way where it's ranking in position 1, 2, or 3 after your normal 3 or 4 PPC ads, then you're actually giving yourself an opportunity, if you're advertising, to get clicked on twice. So now that you're thinking about organic, I want to build that out first because that's my moat, right? That's something that once I have it in place, it's going to be harder for competitors to come and act on it because SEO is a little bit slower. When you implement it, it might take 90 days to get in place, but once you have it in there, it's a little bit harder to get knocked out of that 1, 2, and 3 spot. And then I have customers think about, after looking at the data and using tools like an SEMrush or a Google Search Console or things along those lines, then we look at what are the things that we're not ranking for organically, right, that we want to drive outcomes for, and advertising against that so we can actually conquest against our competitors. Because in different spots where we're already ranking 1, 2, or 3, we're going to get a little bit more organic traffic. We may put some budget there just to sort of protect our territory and dominate page 1. But it can't be the only thing because the problem with PPC is that it's one of those things that once you get hooked, it's hard to turn off. So if your whole strategy is based off of paying for acquisition, then the second you stop paying is the second you stop getting acquisitions. So if you look at, like, for example, Walmart acquired a company for $3.3 billion a few years ago called Jet.com. And Jet.com was built out to be this huge Amazon competitor. And they were growing year over year, but they were actually spending millions of dollars on customer acquisition through PPC. So everything that you were seeing was that this isn't actually a company worth $3.3 billion, because if you turned off the advertising, they didn't have organic sales. They were sort of trying to force sales into the front door. Now, Walmart acquired it for other reasons. They were sort of losing in terms of the e-commerce wars, and so they wanted to do sort of an acqui-hire and bring their CEO over, who actually started Diapers.com and used to work for Jeff Bezos. So they wanted that talent internally to build out their e-commerce. But it just kind of goes to show you that when you pay for customers, the second you stop, you sort of lose that instant impact.
Touche. In fact, I saw a stat the other day, which is going contrary now to paid advertising or corporate advertising. It said 92% of people, and I presume that means you and me are included, trust other consumer recommendations over paid advertising. 92%. And so, those recommendations, who are they coming from? I hear the term influencer marketing quite a bit lately. Is that a phenomena that you understand and support?
Well, a lot of the data shows that, this isn't necessarily scientific, but marketers at larger corporations tend to sort of look for what are the quick opportunities, or what are sort of the popular buzzwords or opportunities that are out there. And so what I've heard from a lot of influencer marketers who are doing this, not even at the grandest scale, but like at a mid-level, that are getting sponsorships or getting products sent to them, is that, the brands never come back and ask for metrics. Right? They sort of pay to have a product featured, and then the brand never comes back and says, well, how did that do? How many likes did you get, right? So they're sort of just going with this spray and pray approach and saying, well, maybe, someone will see it. But reputation is very important, and there's a lot of reputation sites out there, right? And so a lot of people instantly think about Yelp as an example, and people go, oh, well, Yelp, that's just for restaurants. Actually, I have friends over at Yelp, and they say that their biggest market is retail in terms of where they're seeing the clicks, the traffic, and a lot of people coming in and leaving reviews. So influencer marketing, that is something that, you sort of almost look at as PR. It's a little bit harder to track, but it spreads goodwill, where focusing on reputation, like review response, going into different platforms where your product might have. And so you think about products, but also services. There's a lot of different SaaS reputation platforms out there now where you can actually go and rate SaaS platforms. Or there's a platform out there called Clutch where you can actually go rate marketing agencies and marketing consultancies, right? Or Sift, where you can go and look at local technology companies. So there's a lot of different places where you can actually focus on building out a positive reputation.
So there's a trivial saying that content is king, that what really counts in your email marketing, in your video marketing, whatever it might be, is the production and delivery of quality content. And then a subset of that would be blogging. Another rock thrown is that blogging is kind of overdone. There are too many bloggers. There's too much blog content. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that blogging is dead in any sort of way, but you have to look at it differently, right? You don't necessarily want to call your blog. You want to think about what the kind of content you'll be providing is. Is it insight content? Is it research content? Is it how-tos? So is that more of a training library, right? So it's developing content that there's actually a demand and a desire for. And you can do that in a lot of different ways of sort of figuring out what your content calendar should look like. One way is talking to your customers and saying, what do you want to see more of? So if you're a SaaS platform and you're thinking about content, it's how-tos maybe for your platform. Or I've seen it really work out nicely where different SaaS platforms will write content around how to link their tool to another tool, right? And so that helps you actually get a little bit of a referral back to another platform. So it's thinking about the sort of content that people want to see. I'll give you an example just from personal experience. At our company, we use the G Suite. So we use Gmail, we use Google Sheets, we use Google Docs. And a lot of times, we'll be thinking through, hey, how can we automate the flow of information from our Gmail account to our Google Sheets? So you go out and you Google that information, and there was this excellent article that walked you through it step by step of how to connect everything. And it turns out like that website was a marketing group, right? So they were building content that marketers may have questions around, like how do I link this platform to that platform? And so now I've subscribed and I go back and I look at their information because I found that helpful. So sometimes you have to ask your customers. Other times you can go and leverage a tool like SEMrush, which is essentially a tool that lets you put in specific keywords that you're interested in tracking and following, and it will show you where does your site rank in relationship to your competition or other sites. And so if you're not ranking for anything yet, or you haven't started a blog and you want to get started, start there. See what are people searching for? What's the average volume? A lot of times people say, oh, well, there's only 20 searches for that keyword a month. Well, great. Be number one. 90% of those 20 people a month are going to click on your link if you're in position 1. And those people are going to have a higher intent to potentially subscribe or make a purchase if that's the outcome that you're trying to drive, right? Who cares if it's 10 or 20 people? It doesn't have to be 10,000. Those are going to be actually more competitive. So you have to, as a startup, think about, well, where are the opportunities where I can win? Mm-hmm. And it's not always going to be in the most competitive spots. Sometimes it's better to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond.
Cool. There are many, many tools available, and there's one more I wanted to touch on. And by the way, for the listeners just joining, I'm with Ryan Fratzke of Fratzke Media, who is a marketing consultant who supports the startup community. Video has been trumpeted for about 15 years as the dominant form of content. And in fact, what that would mean is you should buy Cisco stock because they're the ones who make the technology that distributes video.
Right.
I'm still kind of waiting, I think, for video to really come into its own. This is about me, but when I'm searching a product, I'm going to make a purchase, I will dive deep into YouTube to look for user reviews and content. But I'm a pretty impatient fellow.
Right.
And most of the video content out there today is just it takes too much time. So what's your take on video, its effectiveness, and how a startup might use it?
I think it can be very effective. Again, it comes back to the sort of video content that you want to produce. We live in an amazing world. I laugh at the iPhone 11 Pro and how it has 3 cameras on it, but that's a very small device that fits in your pocket that allows you to produce some beautiful shots and get some great audio, right? So video doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to invest in, the boom mics and the Canon 7Ds or the Canon 1Ds or whatever. So a lot of times, when people want to start a restaurant, they say, oh, we have to build it from scratch. Well, maybe you should go somewhere that already has a kitchen, right? So use the technology that you have and then think about what is the kind of content that people want to see. Going even further with that, though, a lot of folks don't think about the SEO optimization of video and making sure that you're properly tagging those videos in such a way. And then if you put that video on your website that you're leveraging something, and this is going deep into the weeds here, but something along the lines of schema tags, which is actually like a predetermined language that all the big search engines came together and said, we're going to use these predetermined tags to help define what is on a page. So if you have video on a page, using those tags can actually help when someone does a Google search. You'll see this now where the video, if you do a Google search for something, it can display you a video and actually bookmark and pinpoint the exact part in the video that you would be most interested in, right? So it might take you to, the 10th minute of a 20-minute video. And that doesn't happen on accident. That's actually doing all the proper legwork on the back end to make sure that that video is getting you the most mileage possible. And it's telling Google exactly minute by minute, whether that's developing the transcripts and making sure that the transcripts of the video are connected to the video, or using schema tags. That actually helps you get a lot more mileage out of your video.
Cool. Well, let me flip the conversation a little bit. So, and this is about you and James.
Uh-huh.
So let's go back in time. Were you guys always like this? I mean,
goofy looking. Is that?
So tell me about you and now. James is your brother.
Yes.
And he's a twin, and you're identical.
That's true.
Twins, right?
Yeah, well, we always like this. We always had a passion. Well, first off, there's two kinds of twins in this world: twins who get along and twins who don't, right?
Oh.
And it's funny because we're twins that get along. Our father and uncle are twin brothers, and they're twins that don't, right?
No.
So we've seen it both ways.
And are they identical?
They are. And I mean, they get along in the sense that they're family, right?
Yeah.
But they don't jive as well as like James and I do.
Yeah.
Our parents used to joke. They'd say, "Hey, you guys are going to have to split up eventually." And then we subsequently went to Disney and worked there at the same time in the same department, and left Disney and went to Brandify and worked there together at the same time, and then left and started this company 3 years ago. So we really like working with each other, but we've always had a passion for entrepreneurship. We were those guys who would go out and mow lawns or stain fences, and when we were 18, we started a graphic design business and opened it up in our Temecula Mall for Black Friday. So we're always seeing the opportunity and trying to sort of get in front of people and share with them the story and create value and be helpful. So we've always been that way, but I think what happens, and startup founders will kind of experience this too, there's sort of the 1.0 version of you when you start your entrepreneurial journey, and then there's the 2.0 version and the 3.0 and so forth and so forth. So there's things that you learn day one when you're starting a company. I get it. It's tough. You're not only the founder and you're acting as the CEO, but you're the CTO, you're the CMO, you're all of these different things. You have to wear so many different hats. And so what you have to start to think about, or at least this is what was helpful to us to move sort of from that 1.0 to that 2.0 entrepreneur, was starting to think about how do we take ourselves out of the technician mode. And it doesn't have to be day one. I understand, limited funds means you can't hire a bunch of people day one. But if day one you're starting to build out processes that can be teachable, then eventually as you start to acquire funds through, actually making sales or getting investors, then you have a plan in place for growth very quickly, because you can help folks think like you, operate like you would, and then that allows you to stop working in the machine and actually be more strategic in working on the machine, which I think is very important, just sort of having that sort of third-person perspective on things and being able to tinker with how you operate rather than being so far into the weeds.
Got it. So let's return back to the startup world, and one thing that seems to be true of universally of all startups is they don't have any money. Mm-hmm. And they need to get started. And so given that constraint, which is pretty difficult, how can a startup begin to market itself either cheaply or free?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And I suppose the context is digital, but it might be more than digital too.
Yeah, so the thing with digital sometimes is it's scary because folks want to sort of go DIY. And I think a lot of times if you go full-on DIY, you tend to DIW, do it wrong, or mess something up. There's a lot of examples where you can accidentally click a button on WordPress and it actually blocks your website from Google altogether, right? And people don't realize that until 6 months down the road. So at different times, you want to see where your trusted partners are that can help you out. But to get things started, it comes back to really understanding the outcome. So as a startup, what sort of startup are you trying to be? Are you looking for investment? Then you really want to make sure that you're building your digital presence around sort of selling the big vision of your company, and then making sure that you have a page around investor relations or sort of how to get in contact, and making sure that you're sort of getting out there and pitching to investors. On the flip side of that, if you're a company that can kind of hit the ground running from day one and start making sales, you have some sort of platform, setup, then with your limited funds, you want to make sure you do a good job of optimizing your site for conversion or optimizing your digital platform for conversion, making it easy for the customer to understand what the features and the benefits are and giving them a quick way to opt in or get in contact with sales. So I think it's coming back down to just that story. Building a digital presence does not have to be difficult, but what it does need is you need to take that step back, understand the consumer, where the platforms are that they are hanging out online, build out the strategy, know what your KPIs are, and start taking action on it and be ready to iterate if something doesn't work out or pivot, if you will.
Yeah. So you were talking about DIY, and that's a common place to start, is that I can do that, right? And the WordPress example, you know, where I go in and change the theme and my site explodes, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's happened to me as well.
We've all been there.
What are some of the common startup mistakes in the digital marketing arena that you've seen? Maybe the first example is the obsession with DIY.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I see is sort of taking bad advice and then sort of running with that. So a lot of times people will go, well, I heard if we just do this many posts with this many words on a weekly basis, then we'll be able to drive traffic. And so we can hire a content writer that kind of gets it, but they're going to write us something that kind of looks like something else that someone else already has. And so they sort of invest up front on soft logic. So I think the thing that you can do before you start to take actions or start getting tactical is taking a step back and thinking about, do we have enough funds up front? Or can we strike a deal? Is it an equity deal? Is there something that we can do up front to bring a partner in who understands the digital space, who's learned the lessons already, and can sort of help you, get in the time machine and jump maybe 9 months down the road, and all of the mistakes have already happened, right? Because they know that stuff, and so they can actually help you avoid those pitfalls. I think it's important to make that investment up front because at the end of the day, you're going to spend the same amount investing in sort of outside freelancers, but you may get too far down the road and realize, oh, this didn't work. The second thing to think about too is when you go DIY, you have to think about your time and what it's worth. So if you're a developer and you're the mastermind behind developing this great technology, then you really don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're sitting there trying to write content or set up an email campaign, because there's a learning curve for you, and you're wasting your time if your time is worth money, and so then you're wasting money. So there's different ways to think about it, but I would get somebody who understands the space at kind of almost a strategic, a CMO level, that's willing to sort of give their time or sort of make a deal in terms of how much their time costs, and get those thoughts early.
I totally agree with you, and I think there's an aversion to spending money, particularly by startups with consultants. And son of a gun, the consultant, as you articulated, might have 10, 15, 20 years experience in the space where you are a novice.
Yeah.
It's like well worth the money.
I agree. Yeah. I think people are scared sometimes, and it's because when you're the startup founder, you have that personal and emotional connection. It's like, your baby. Yeah. And you don't want anything to happen to that baby, and you're afraid of getting burnt, and you're afraid if you can trust that person or not. That's why you have to do your due diligence. You have to pick the right partner. There's a lot of examples where people are like, I'm not sure I want to invest in SEO because someone sold me SEO for $500 a month and it didn't work, right? And so you have to know the difference between an expert and vetting them and asking the right questions and having them show you the case studies versus somebody who's a really good slick talker, because it's that reputation of getting burnt that people are scared to do. But I firmly believe you got to pay to play, right? And if you believe in the idea and you truly believe in its success, then go into your personal funds if you can, if you believe in it. If you can do a friends and family round, try that. Find a way to be able to bring in the right people at the right time. And I know that's hard and it's scary. but it could be the critical difference between that exponential growth that you're looking for or, 10 years of a bunch of pivots and sort of restarting.
So I wanted to look into the future, although the words I'm going to say are also about the now, and that is some emerging digital tools. And the areas that I think that look really interesting from a marketing perspective, and you don't have to react to all of these, but I'm thinking artificial intelligence, visual search, augmented reality, virtual reality, because those are all digital tools that are becoming available, are available, and have marketing applications.
Yeah.
Any of those resonate with the work you're doing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, omnichannel is a big piece, right? Because as much as people want to say that offline is going away, it's not. That online to offline connection is very critical. Amazon, which spent years and years building their digital presence, is now getting into brick and mortar. Walmart, which has over 4,000 stores, is now working on their digital presence and acquiring digitally native brands, right? So omnichannel is critical. You want to make sure that your customer can buy what they want, when they want, and have it delivered to them, or they can pick it up however they'd like. But coming back to, I think you mentioned AI, I think you mentioned visual search, and we look at what Google is. There's a stat out there that like 87% of people go to Google first when they're looking for a new product. And the number of searches where people have used the phrase, should I fill in the blank, has increased by 82% over the last 2 years.
No kidding.
So people are going to Google not only to find things, but for advice, for answers. And what you're starting to see is not only do you have your ads or your position 1, 2, or 3, but now we have position 0. So position 0 is an example of Google has what it thinks is an answer for you, it will give it to you. Okay, now let's go back to AI and visual search, even voice search if we think about Alexa or Google Home. You're asking a question, and now the AI is going to be able to provide you with an answer based off of what it knows about you. The AI will be smarter. It will know your schedule. It will know your finances. It will know what you have around you in your macro and micro environments. And then through voice or through visual display, it will give you an answer, right? Rather than options and you have to do some more research. It will tell you exactly what to do, where to buy, or where to buy it, and potentially even give you options through AI to make decisions for you, right? So you think about things like smart refrigerators. One of the promises of that is it's going to know how often you buy milk, and it's going to know how often or when you're running low on milk, and then it's just going to automatically order that from Amazon, and somebody or a robot one day is going to be able to just put it in your fridge when you're at work. So when you're thinking about those things as a marketer, it all comes back down to what is the sort of data that you can provide to those tools. Whether it's Amazon, whether it's Google, what kind of data can we provide so that when a consumer has a question, your brand has the right answer? Because people are not going to be brand loyal. They're going to be platform loyal or answer loyal. Whatever platform gives them the best answers, they're going to feel most comfortable using. And so you're going to want to make sure that the data you're providing is in good quality. And the last thing I'll say about that, just to sort of show you where things are going, is that if you go and you look on Google today and you're looking to plan a vacation, you can say planning a trip to Pittsburgh, right? I'm a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So planning a trip to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It will show you in the Google interface flights. You can book the flight right there. It will show you hotels. You can book the hotel right there. It will show you landmarks and restaurants, and you can book a reservation for those things right in the interface without ever clicking to Hilton.com or without ever clicking Delta.com or Hotel Tonight or whatever system you're using. So Google's building a platform where you never have to leave it. So it doesn't matter if it's visual or if it's the search result or anything like that. As a brand, now it's important to give Google the right information because you may not get that traffic in the future.
Yeah. There's something you said a few minutes ago that is, to me, it's really exciting, and it's happened over the last 5 years. It used to be when you would go to do a search within, for example, Google, you would enter 2 or 3 keywords. That was the way to do it. Today, it's possible to have a conversation in search. And this is something I emphasize with my students. If you're trying to solve a problem, speak to Google in that fashion. And it's amazing how they can refine the results more precisely by saying, how do I cook Indian fry bread at home?
Right.
Which I did recently.
And how'd that work out?
It was okay. It wasn't bad.
Nice.
But so it's a conversation that I think is really exciting. So we're down to just a few minutes. I wanted to, so it's a year from now. Tell me what's going on at Fratzke Media. What's happening with you guys?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's been great is we've been able to double each year. So, through the last 3 years, we've doubled in size and revenue, and so that's been really exciting. So I'd hope to see that happen. I anticipate on seeing that happen based off of the data that we're seeing. So that's exciting. And then really what we're doing is building a team and a culture from a company perspective that fosters and grows solution engineers and smart people that can tackle lots of different problems. And one of our principles at Fratzke Media is to provide 11-star service. Well, what the heck does that mean? You go to Yelp and the top rating is 5 stars. I don't know about you, JJ, but I don't go to a restaurant and say, gee, I hope I get 3-star service today, right? It's like 5 stars is the expectation. It's the bare minimum. So at Fratzke, we want to provide 11-star service. And so we're investing in different tools, whether it's our project management tools or our accounting software or our training tools for our own internal personal team members, to make sure that we can exceed those expectations in every interaction so our customers say, wow, that's an experience that I could only get at Fratzke, right? I haven't seen that level of service or those level of results at any other firm that I've worked with.
Cool. Well, you've been most generous with your time, and I'm grateful. How can I help you? How can our listeners contact you?
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, listeners can always reach out to us at Fratzke Media.
You might spell that, by the way.
Yeah, I will. Fratzke media.com. So folks can always get in contact with us there. We're pretty active on LinkedIn as well. So those are 2 great spots. My email address is really simple. If you want to email me directly with any marketing questions, I'd be happy to answer any that you have. And it's just ryan@fratzkemedia.com. But you asked, how can you help us or how can our listeners help? And really, I'll turn that around to the listeners and say, how can we help you, right? We're here to exceed expectations. We're here to be your partner and help you navigate this intense digital ecosystem where there's a lot of giants in the space, and it may feel like you're going to get lost in the shuffle. And so we're always happy to jump on the phone and just have those initial consultation conversations and just learn about your business and see where we can help. So you can help us by thinking about how we can help you.
Excellent, excellent. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us again this week. Be sure to follow me, John Bradley Jackson, at johnbradleyjackson.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and occasionally on Twitter. And also, I suggest you visit the Center for Entrepreneurship at Cal State Fullerton's website and join in on the conversation. Our guest next week is going to be special. Her name is Ann Horvath, and she is a stand-up comedian and a improvisation expert. And if you think about it, she's a startup trying to launch her career. She's midlife. She happens to be a registered nurse. And then in the evening, she turns into a stand-up comic. It's an interesting combination when you think about it. But be sure to join us next Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and I look forward to seeing you folks at that time.